I just wanted to have the chance to share with you again about Liferay's vision. I know many of you hear this talk from me every year. Hopefully it's still interesting for you, but for those of you who are new, I want you to know the motivation for Liferay as a company. And to put some of our different projects and passions in context, I want to share with you my ideas about how all of us, not just Liferay, can create a culture of change in our organizations. Briefly, our vision as a company, the reason why we want to exist is because we want to help other people reach their full potential to serve others. This is our vision statement, and I think it's important to distinguish that we're not just talking about people reaching their potential, which is also important, but specifically, we see the role of people in society to reach the potential to serve other people. And that could mean in many ways. It could be through volunteering, but also through the very work that you do as developers and business people. You can actually use those talents to make life better for others. Okay, so I broke this down into 4 different principles that we can apply in creating this culture. The first is to lead by example. The second is to pursue excellence. Third is to empower people. And finally, to find partners. Lead by example, being a leader. This is actually, I think, one of the hardest things for us today in our modern, postmodern culture. Not just here in Europe, but also in the US, also in Asia. Everywhere I travel, what I notice more than anything else is that we're all skeptical. We're all unsure of what the answers are. We are not willing to take a stand and say, this is right and this is wrong, for a number of reasons. Because big institutions have failed us, because American software companies said they were open source and then they take away features. It's like, oh, you lied to us, we can't trust you anymore. Or just because we were idealistic in our younger days, and as we tried to solve the world's problems, we faced all these barriers and we didn't know how to create real change. But I still believe that the first step in creating a culture of change is to be willing to take that step and to say, even though I'm not sure, even though I have all these doubts, I'm willing to say this is something that's important and to risk my own reputation and my own comfort in order to lead. Well, I was recently in Korea to visit my dad, and my dad lives in the very southern part of Korea. Just to help us figure out where it is. You have Italy all the way on the left there, and then there's another peninsula all the way on the right, and that's Korea. And in fact, you can actually get almost there by train, all the way to the end of Russia, and then you got to figure it out from there. But Korea, like Italy, is a peninsula. It's shaped like this, and you may or may not know there was a big civil war in Korea in 1950. During that war, what happened was after World War II, Japan surrendered. They had Korea as their colony, and then the Americans came, and the Japanese surrendered. And so I believe Russia on one side and the US on the other, they were both involved in this war. And so what they did was they drew a big line across the country and said, okay, Russia, you guys can kind of oversee the top part, and the US will oversee the bottom. Well, by 1950, the Communist Party in North Korea, in the northern part of Korea, which was still not divided yet, they decided to come down into the south. And so there was this war. It took about 3 years, and at the end, the peninsula remained divided. You can see actually on the map, the city I mentioned, Busan, is at the bottom. And basically what happened during this war was that because the communists were coming from the northern part, including later the Chinese army, all the refugees were streaming southward, right? They were all trying to flee all the fighting and going down. And these are just some photos of what it looked like back then. This was a demolished bridge that refugees were crossing to get down, just overloaded on a train, bringing all of their personal possessions with them. And so as they fled down south, a lot of refugees told each other, let's meet in Busan, right? And in Busan, there's actually this famous bridge made of iron, and it was well known. And they said, if we lose each other, let's meet there. And you can still actually go there today. But all of these refugees came down, and they created these shanty towns in Busan. And this was just poor people living and just scrounging together. And if you go to Busan today, it's a very modern metropolis. It's very developed. But you can actually still see some of the remnants of the effects of the war. This is, again, a photo from back in the 50s of one of the many mountainsides in Busan where a lot of these shanty towns were built. And you can actually go to some of those neighborhoods today and still see how these evolved over time. So now they're made with brick and concrete and metal roofs, but this is really a vestige of that time. So talking about leadership, I wanted to share the story of someone that I learned about on this trip. In the midst of the war and the time after, there were many orphans throughout the peninsula, but especially in Busan. And you can see again some photos of those orphans here. But there were so many of these orphans, and there was an American priest. He was actually Catholic, and his name was Aloysius Schwartz. And he was living in the area of Boston in the US, living a very comfortable life. And as he was going through the process of becoming a priest, he felt this real burden that he should somehow live his life out in service of the poor. And one thing led to another, and basically he ended up in Korea. And in Korea, he found that in Busan there was this situation with all of the orphans. And he really dedicated his life to making life better for these kids. Basically giving them a place to sleep, giving them an education, and making sure that although they were abandoned or lost their parents during the war, that they were able to live a better life. And what I learned from this process of finding out about his life was that it actually wasn't very easy. I've personally stood up here and talked to you guys about some of the things that we do through Liferay, but to be honest, it's actually pretty easy. We find an organization we like, we donate some money, we take a week off, and we volunteer our time. But more or less, it doesn't really take any big sacrifice from us to do these things. And when I read his biography, I actually learned that one of the things he did was he had to stand up to basically kind of organized crime. So these street thugs basically would round up some of these orphan kids, and they put them into this it was kind of an orphanage, but really it was kind of like a trafficking situation because these kids were vulnerable. And so these thugs would force the kids to go out in the streets and beg or go steal things from the American soldiers and whatnot. And basically in this complex, they were beaten, they weren't given much food and so forth. And so Father Aloysius actually confronted them, risking physical danger to himself. He actually had to raise money to buy them out and say, we're gonna take over taking care of these kids and you guys need to get out. And that wasn't the last time that he actually had to do that. He did that several times in his life where he was actually beaten by these criminals, but he had to stand up to them and ultimately win over the right to care for these people. And it's just an amazing story. If you want to find out more, you can ask me. But he went on actually to start similar homes in the Philippines and Mexico as well. And it's just a great story. And I was really humbled by his story. First of all, because I'm a Korean. I'm of Korean ancestry, and here was this foreign person coming to help people from our country in this way. But also, I just felt that he really lived this example of leadership and taught me a lot in terms of the sacrifice that it takes. Now, I have to admit that for me to stand in front of you as a business and technical crowd to talk about these things, it's a little bit scary for me too, because It's the reputation of Liferay. I think we're actually saying that we're going to be a certain kind of company, and we're setting a standard for ourselves on how we're going to behave. And yet, I think it's important enough to say that we want to be this kind of company that I'm going to put myself out there in front of all you and talk about this. So being a leader. Second is to pursue excellence. I truly believe that if you are really, really good at what you do, then you will have the chance to influence people, to make change, and to be a force for good. One of our employees, this guy's named Angelo. He works in the Diamond Bar office in Los Angeles area. And he was quite a precocious kid. At the age of 12, he said, "I'm an immortal person. I'm going to live forever." And this was, at the time, the hubris of a teenager. But he has since grown up into a fine young man, and he has become a really, really good designer. And so one of the ways that he uses his skills is on the commercial side of Liferay. He helped to create our retail banking demo, which some of you may have seen. The design is really nice, and we're using it throughout the world. But he also has had a chance to use his design and UI skills in the nonprofit side. So one of the organizations we support, it's called Zoe, and they are fighting human trafficking in an area of Thailand, which is close to Myanmar and Cambodia, where there's a lot of at-risk kids living in villages. And so they go around and they educate these kids how to know when there's a human trafficker and how to avoid them. Of course, they also work with the local authorities and the police to rescue kids that are in situations of human trafficking. And once they rescue the kids, they help them to grow up as young kids into a normal adult life. Well, Zoe actually asked us, Liferay, to help them to build a human trafficking incident database. This is a database that lets anyone with a mobile phone either take a photo or open the app and fill in some information. If they see something strange going on, if they see a kid being trafficked, if they see, like an uncle who's talking to a trafficker about possibly selling their nephew or niece, you're able to report it anonymously, and it goes into this database, which can then collect that information, help visualize it, help find patterns, and to help law enforcement to prevent the trafficking. So Angelo, who pursued excellence as a designer, is now working on the wireframes for this tool, and he's able to use the fact that he has his professional skill at Liferay in order to do this work. And he tells me often that even though Liferay isn't the best company he could work for with his skills, it's because of things like this that he continues to invest in our company. The third thing I truly believe in is in empowering people. And one of the things I love about the Italy Symposium is I see so many of you who have been empowered through Liferay open source software to do great things, to build your businesses, and to serve your communities. I talked to Dennis today, who's a very famous member of the Liferay community, as well as many, many others of you about the decision about clustering that's been very controversial. We're going to figure out ways to continue to support the businesses that you do here in Italy in the mid-market. Carol, I'm sorry, I know I'm making your life harder, but it's something we have to do. Also in Spain, right? But I believe in empowering people, and I see the good that happens through Dennis and through all of you in the community when we do that. I also saw the good that came out of empowering people when we launched our new DXP product. When Eddie Duke, who you heard from this morning with his amazing speech, he actually helped to create the new branding for the Liferay digital experience platform, and our design team in LA came up with the logo and the branding, and so that was really amazing. But in the area of service and volunteering, one of the great things that we've seen through our employee volunteer program is seeing Liferay staff using that time and finding innovative ways to give back to the community. And for that, I have this video, but I don't have the audio, so I'll just try to use this microphone if I can. This is just a video sharing about some of the volunteering that our employees have done in the Madrid office. All right. Okay, great. All right. Okay, so the last point I just want to make is about finding partners. And I think that video is a good example of that, where we partnered with organizations like Serve the City to do our volunteering program. I found it really interesting. I found this quote from the CEO of the Gates Foundation about partnership. And they basically say that they can't do any of the work that they do without partnership. And I found this interesting because they have a lot of money, actually. I think the richest man in the world created a foundation, and so they're never going to run out of money to do good things, and yet they still rely on other organizations to make a difference. And so I realized that regardless of the scale at which you're operating, you can never do it alone. So just as another example of this, I wanted to close by sharing about one other person whose work we support. Going back to this area of the world, Korea, this is a family called the Yoons. This is Stefan Yoon, who is a physical therapist and a chiropractor. And he was called in his life to a very difficult place, probably one of the most difficult places in the world today, which is North Korea. North Korea is, to me, a very, very scary place, actually. It is not only a scary place, it's surrounded by scary places, right? This is just a map of the area where they work. Rason is a small city just across the border from Russia and China. And the government of North Korea, they have created a special economic zone in Rason where you can actually do a little bit of small business and things like that. But there's also a lot of humanitarian workers going in and out of the country trying to help the people there. So here you can see a photo of some of the kids who live in this area. In Asia, it's very important to be very presentable and to how you appear to the outside world. And so when they knew that they were going to take a photo, of course, they put on their best clothes and everything. But that does kind of hide the actual situation where a lot of the basic necessities are really hard to get. And so Stephen and his wife and their family are part of an organization that helps kids like these with things like winter boots and blankets. They also manufacture food and milk, bread and milk in the local area, and they distribute it to a lot of these kids. One of the interesting things about what they do is that they're trying to actually do it through an entrepreneurial business aspect. So Stephen Yoon's dad actually used to be in the shoe business, and they actually opened a small factory in North Korea where they manufacture these boots. And so what they do is they say, they ask donors if they're willing to donate money to create these shoes, and then they create the shoes in the factory in North Korea so that they can stimulate the local economy and create jobs. And then they distribute the boots not only to the kids in North Korea, but other places like Mongolia. So it's a great kind of ecosystem of nonprofit and sort of business mentality work that all works together. Well, most recently, Dr. Yoon started to realize that there was a big problem with cerebral palsy in North Korea. A lot of young people who are physically disabled, they're not able to move their arms and their legs, but they're actually able to be healed with some very simple physical therapy and treatment, which as long as you're trained, anyone can do it. And so Dr. Yoon has been living in the capital of North Korea, and he has been working with some local nurses to teach them how to do this physical therapy so that the kids in North Korea can overcome their physical disability. They talk about some of the kids that they've helped. A lot of times in North Korea, I guess they don't realize that the physical handicap is not a mental one. A lot of these students are perfectly able to learn to go to class and all that, but because of their physical disability, they are prevented from doing so. And so by helping them, Dr. Yoon and his family are able to change the lives of these kids. And this young girl in particular, her dream is to also become a doctor to help other kids like her. Well, where does partnership come in? So a lot of us, we have small businesses, we have technical skills, we have a lot of resources. You may feel that there's not much that you can do to help in a situation like this, but I wanted to close with the story of this young man who has been being educated by Dr. Yoon's wife. And she shares that although his vision is not very good, he's actually very, very intelligent. And if he had, let's say, an iPad or a computer or something like that to read in a large print, he would actually be able to keep up with and actually surpass some of the other students in his class. And so whether it is through financial support, whether it is through teaching on technical skills, I think there are many things that all of us can do to contribute to and to partner with the effort in not only here, but I'm sure throughout Italy, throughout Europe, so many ways that we can really help to make a difference. So just to summarize, as we do excellent work, we build credibility with others so that we can lead them by example in showing the ways that they can help and to make a difference. You don't try to control things, but you empower people to be part of that change. And you do this, of course, in partnership with others. And I think just to close, this symposium, for me, is one of the best examples that we're trying to do this at Liferay. You are not just my audience, you're not just my customers. You really are a part of what makes all of this possible for me and for all of us. And so I want to thank you for actually living this out already in being part of the Liferay ecosystem. It's my humble privilege to continue to serve you for the last 13 years, and I hope we can continue to work together for many years in the future. Thank you.